All right, we're recording now, so welcome. Thanks again for being here, guys. People are still trickling in, so I'm going to continue to let people in, but we will go ahead and get started. And I just want to, take us sort of like through what we went over yesterday, just high level, and if anybody has any questions, you can ask questions, and then we're going to continue on with what we have for today. So yeah, again, really excited to be here. It's so good to see y'all's faces. My husband says I'm hiding at the studio now that it's opened. Maybe he's right. Maybe it's true. So I'm just really excited to be here. Alrighty, so we're going to get started today back into our presentation. And yes, the presentations will be available for everyone. At the end of the weekend, we'll upload them to that presentation folder for everyone. Alrighty, so sequencing to advanced poses. We haven't quite gotten there yet. We're going to talk more about that this afternoon. But we are going to continue to talk this morning about just sequencing in general. And one of the things that I hear from you guys a lot is that sequencing can be intimidating. So typically, like I said yesterday, I start by teaching you guys the movements that are associated with the poses, just from a very high level, right? Again, we're not massage therapists, we are not physical therapists, we are yoga teachers. And so we want to know what are the mechanisms that get me in and out of these movements, and how can I build from like one posture to the next, right? So that's how I typically teach sequencing. But what has come up for me around sequencing is that, people have a lot of questions. Like yesterday we talked about like the subtle bodies, and one of the questions was, well, how do I sequence to not, like mess up somebody's subtle body? So, this is a great opportunity for us to sort of lean into those questions, fears, maybe even like hesitations that we might have around sequencing and sharing yoga with other people, so that we can sort of eliminate any confusion and empower you guys to really go out and teach. Perfect. So just going to make sure everybody's muted before I move on. Okay. So we talked about sequencing tells a story, and we talked about the time, what it takes to do all these things. So you get on your mat and you are like starting class, and you set up the breath. Setting up the breath usually takes about 5 minutes or so. Then you begin to warm up. Warming up usually takes about 15 minutes. And in my sequencing, warming up actually includes an opportunity for us to sort of go into the postures before we go into the big flow, right? So we spend some time exploring the flow and where we're going to go. So for example, if I'm going to do a lot of stuff in flexion and neutral, think warrior 1, warrior 3, those types of things, then I'm going to start everybody off in like low lunge, maybe some splits, maybe even like a standing L, just to get people to like start to warm up their body a little bit in the direction I'm going, right? Christine, would you mute yourself, please? Christine Harding, I can't mute you for some reason. Just wanted to see if you can do that. So that's the way we start. That's the way we get going. Whoopsie. We talked a little bit about metaphors and using metaphors to help to stimulate the unconscious mind. In yoga, there are 4 states of consciousness. So there's a waking state, which means you're aware and conscious that you are conscious, or, you could say you're awake to consciousness. There's the sleeping state. The sleeping state is a state of your unconscious mind. So those are things you're not aware of, but they are influencing you. They are influencing the way you are engaging with people and in the world around you. Then there's a dreamless sleep state, And in that dreamless sleep state, that is like the state where you are connected to these astral and causal planes. And then there is turiya. Turiya is another way to say samadhi or enlightened state. So the enlightened state is aware of both the aspects of you that is unconscious and the aspects of you that is conscious, and is aware that there is this pure awareness, this dreamless sleep that is underneath everything, that is always watching and is always connecting you to source. So that is samadhi. And, you know, again, it's not this far off place. A lot of our students will actually pick up on samadhi in shavasana, you know, like where they can drop out of the thinking mind and just be like in the experience, like really connected to pure awareness, connected to their conscious awareness, and even connected to that subconscious, unconscious mind. So that's a really cool place to be. And again, I encourage you to look for that in your own practice. Once you start to experience that in your practice, then you can start to teach it in a more accessible way. So I teach it from my experience. I, you know, talk about being in a place where I can see thoughts and feelings and memories arise. I'm not attached to those things. There's sort of an observer sort of aspect to that. I'm aware that I'm aware. I'm aware that I am conscious. I'm aware that I'm in the experience. I'm also aware that I am an embodiment of God, and that there is no separation between God and me and God and you. And if you don't like that word, you could always say universal consciousness, or, you know, or universe or divinity or whatever works for you. But there's this fabric of our world, there's this fabric of our life, and in yoga we call it Purusha. And that Purusha is that pure awareness, that the closest thing to Brahman that we can experience. And it's in you, it's part of you. So those metaphors help to connect all of these pieces together, because the unconscious mind is always at work, right? And the conscious mind is always at work, but it's like they're two passing ships in the night. You know, have you ever felt like that? Like, why did I do this thing that I did? And really it just came from the unconscious mind. And here's the two ships passing in the night, and they're not really, you know, communicating with each other, or that's the perception. You know, our yoga practice can start to link all of those different parts of the mind together so that there is this turiya state of being. We talked about sequencing the subtle bodies, and again, not to intimidate anyone. You know, this comes with practice, and it comes with, you know, time. If you're in a 200-hour training, what I would recommend to you is start easy. Start, you know, with just like the theme of like grounding, or the theme of like empowering, or the theme of, you know, opening, you know, your channels of communication. Like, these are super easy themes that you can integrate into sequences. Say once or twice. You don't have to say it all throughout class. You know, there are teachers who are very good at a lot of cueing and a lot of talking and a lot of story, and I think there's a place for it, but don't be intimidated by it. Don't feel like to theme you need to, like, you know, become an actress and like get on stage. Like, again, it's not about the teacher, it's about the student. So if we can sprinkle in these themes, you know, really in a way that is accessible for our students, it's not too over the top, it's not too much about our agenda. Like, we actually do more good that way. I think when we overly do it, when we make it very theatrical, and there's a lot of talking, for example, about these themes, it can be a little bit, it can be intimidating for students. Some students love it, don't get me wrong. Some students really do like it, but it can be a little bit much sometimes. So finding that balance is, you know, where I would like you guys to start. Maybe it's just one or two mentions of grounding, right? Maybe it's just one or two mentions of, you know, empowering. Maybe it's like, you know, a cue that's metaphoric, you know, for warrior one, like, you know, inhale, warrior one, embrace the warrior within, right? Embrace the warrior within. So something really, really manageable that doesn't have to make you feel like you're, you know, going over the top. Again, you can't really, based on the asanas you choose, I wouldn't be concerned about throwing anybody's chakras out of whack. The chakras are, like I said yesterday, they're physical, actual structures in the body. They're called plexi, plexuses. I've heard several different plurals for this particular word, but basically what they are they're nerve bundles that are fed through blood vessels, and they are responsible for communicating various messages back and forth between particular parts of your body. So, you know, the root chakra is going to communicate to your central nervous system when you feel fearful. And like, it's one of the best ways to teach your students about the root chakra, or to give them a felt sense of root chakra, is that feeling that you get in the base of your tailbone, or right at the base of, you know, your perineum, when you see somebody about to get hurt, or you're close to the edge of a cliff, or you're, you know, walking on the edge of a mountain. You know, most of us have felt that feeling, that I call it like a booty twinge or something. I don't know what to call it really, but it's a very universal feeling, you know, of like, oh my gosh, that's not safe. So when we start to think about the chakras as physical and metaphysical, it becomes a little bit more easy to understand and easy for our students to take to. The Panchamaya Kosha, you actually don't have to really think about sequencing through this, because you already are. We start with the physical asana, and then we move to the pranic breath. And then through the marriage of asana and breath that is so eloquently illustrated in Vinyasa Yoga, we're able to, you know, create a relationship through our practice that actually does quiet the chitta vritti. So this goes back to how I really wish that people would teach in Vinyasa. You know, teach with the intention to teach your students how to, you know, use their central nervous system and their peripheral nervous system to their advantage, how to regulate these systems through the breath. The breath is the only thing that can regulate autonomic functions in the body outside of medicine, pharmaceutical medicine. So if we are able to teach and impart this wisdom to our students, then the next time they get anxious or upset, or are having problems, you know, quieting their mind, going to sleep in the middle of the night, for example, they can begin to use some of these tools to calm their nervous system, to switch from hyper-aroused to a more parasympathetic state where they can rest and digest, which is a really important function of being. We talked about looking at the Panchamaya. Remember, if you weren't on the call yesterday and you are here today, I like these three. So the representation of Annamaya, the representation of Pranamaya, and the representation of Anandamaya, I really like. I do not love the representation of Vijnanamaya for sure. I don't feel like it's accurate in this infographic, but still a good infographic to use, especially when we're talking about these other sheets that we're working with in yoga. We talked about pranayama and sequencing. We are supposed to be teaching our students pranayama. It's maybe not to the extent that I might teach them in a yoga therapy session, but definitely making them aware of their breath, giving them options. Now, please do understand that when you're sequencing and you're integrating pranayama into your sequencing, there are people that get very anxious when they do, for example, Nadi Shodhana or Chandra Nadi Shodhana. There are people that get very anxious when they do Kapalabhati. There are people that get very anxious when they do Brahmari breath, which is the bee's breath. If you guys haven't seen it before, you take your hands and you put them over your eyes and you close your mouth and you make a bee sound through your nose. So, and what Brahmari does is it like actually stimulates the pineal gland. It's supposed to be one of the most calming breaths, one of the breaths that is best for anxiety. But in working with people who have anxiety, sometimes that doesn't work. And sometimes it actually makes them more anxious. So we just have to be aware that what works for one person might not work for another person. And we should always give options. When I'm teaching, I typically teach Ujjayi breath. which is in and out through the nose with the constriction in the base of the throat so that you get an audible sound, almost like an ocean. But I oftentimes will say, if that doesn't work for you, just breathe in and out through your nose without any effort. So don't effort to breathe, just allow it to come in and out through your nose if that suits you better than Ujjayi breath. Again, some people don't like Ujjayi breath, but it is the most universal, and there's degrees with which you can use it. So some of you guys may know what I'm talking about. I can use Ujjayi breath to really kick up the internal heat, which then will cause me to sweat more, or I can use it just enough to feel more regulated and more connected to my breath. So depending on the vigor or the tapas that is applied during the practice will depend on, you know, how intense the pranayama practice is and what the effects are on the body. Dynamic movement and sequencing. So we were talking a little bit about this in class yesterday, but Vini Yoga is very different. So Vini Yoga, they take a lot of the postures, right? So like a warrior one, I might take warrior one here, and I might be inhale, reach up, exhale, cactus the arms. Inhale, reach up, exhale, cactus. So there's a lot of like movements like this, right? And then, or I might be in a warrior two. Now I'm in triangle. So I'm here in triangle. I'm inhale, reach. So wait, it would actually be inhale, reach forward. Exhale, back up. Inhale, reach forward. Exhale, back up. So there's a lot of movement, and I actually use Vini Yoga a lot when I'm working with people who are coming out of like they're coming into rather remission from like cancer, chemotherapy, especially if there's any lymphatic issues, if there's any like lymphedema or anything like that. I use Vini Yoga a lot because it really does help to get the lymph moving in the body. I would even say anybody who's like recovering from a major illness, because we want to flush all of that stuff out of the body, and the lymphatic system does not have its own pump. And sometimes the vigorous movement associated with vinyasa can be too taxing. So incorporating dynamic movement into your sequencing, it really does bring that Vini Yoga element in, which remember is part of our lineage. And I think it gets overlooked a lot of times. But it also does allow for us to work with the body in a different way that maybe, you know, we wouldn't have thought about before, you know. It's just a really cool method to integrate into your sequencing. Here's another like little go of it. So you can go back to these and take a look. Anna Pilar just filmed an intro to Vini Yoga for us for our yoga therapy program. And I'm actually probably going to put that on our Facebook group page so that everybody can view it. It's just a short, like 15-minute video, but she trained with Gary Krafstadt, who is like the Vini Yoga guy. He owns the Vini Yoga Institute, where Vini Yoga therapy is done. He's super serious about Vini Yoga. In fact, if you came to him even with 500 hours and wanted to do his yoga therapy training, he would make you start back at 200 hours with him. Like he takes you all the way back so that you can really be steeped in the lineage of Vini Yoga. And again, I think it's a dying lineage that, you know, unfortunately, Desikachar, Krishnamacharya put their entire life into it, and it needs to be preserved, and it needs to be integrated more holistically into vinyasa. You know, vinyasa is not power yoga. That's what people think of vinyasa when they think vinyasa, but you can teach a vinyasa class with modified vinyasas, with a Vini Yoga vinyasa philosophy. It doesn't have to look one way. So don't forget that this is an option for you guys when you're sequencing.
Why is it that Vini Yoga isn't as well and popular?
So it is really popular with people who know what it is. But here's what happens. So Krishnamacharya and Desikachar were working together later in Krishnamacharya's life. So Iyengar's already gone off and done his thing, and they don't really get along. Iyengar didn't really get along with Krishnamacharya anyway. And then Patabi's already gone off and done his thing, and Patabi and Iyengar were like world renowned, right? They really went outside and beyond India. Now, Krishnamacharya didn't. He stayed put. He stayed in India. He did his thing. You know, he and Desikachar developed Vinaya. Krishnamacharya did not want to call it Vinaya. He didn't want to trademark it and brand it. He thought that it was just yoga therapy. Like that's what Krishnamacharya's perspective was, or at least that's what I've been told by Leslie Kaminoff. So I'll give credit where credit is due. All this that I'm telling you right now is coming directly from Leslie Kaminoff. And so Leslie worked with Krishnamacharya. He was the person filming all those videos. I've told you guys to go check out Krishnamacharya's videos on YouTube. There are videos of Krishnamacharya and Desikachar that are on YouTube that you can actually watch them. And all of those videos, Leslie Kaminoff is filming them, okay? So if you know who Leslie Kaminoff is, he's one of the master teachers that we have. He's based out of New York, and he's a Vinaya teacher. And his, Vinayaga's big focus is the breath. And so after Krishnamacharya died, Desikachar trademarked Vinaya and became very sort of secretive about it, like would not teach it just out in, any space. It had to be in like a Vinaya Institute and all of this stuff. And it just became less accessible. Like just imagine it's a little bit less accessible. And I think that's where the problem started. And then after Desikachar died, and this is coming straight from Leslie Kaminoff. So after Desikachar died, I believe that Desikachar's son, came back in and said, okay, if you haven't been trained through us, you can't call yourself a Vinaya teacher. And Leslie had trained through his father. Leslie had trained through Desikachar and Krishnamacharya, and now Desikachar's son is telling people, if you haven't trained with me, then you can't call yourself a yoga teacher. This is how I understand it. So please, the story may or may not be accurate. Again, this is secondhand from Leslie. And at that point, Leslie got really pissed. And I think you can go onto Leslie Kaminoff's website and read the Vinaya blog post he wrote about this. It's there, right? Mackenzie, have you ever read it? Am I telling the story right?
Yeah, I actually read it last night, ironically enough.
Yeah. He basically says, forget you, that F is a different word, guys. Forget you and your Vinaya. I trained with your dad and your grandpa. I can do whatever I want. That's Leslie's sort of like mentality on it. So basically, I think what happened was it stopped being accessible. When Krishnamacharya was alive, when Desikachar was alive, it was much more accessible. And then when those two were not alive anymore, fame does a funny thing to people, right? And sometimes people want to hold on to that and they don't want to let other people in. And that can have the opposite effect of what you're trying to do. Like you're trying to protect the lineage. I get it, right? I think everything's always a misunderstanding. So I think there was a misunderstanding that, the kids wanted to protect their father and grandfather's lineage, and the rest of the world said, well, forget you, I'm out of here. And we don't want to do that. We want to say wholeheartedly, we are not trained in Vinaya, but Vinaya is a part of the Vinyasa lineage, and we can't, excise it from our style of yoga, because it really does influence Vinyasa a lot. I mean, all those reversed warriors, and the Vinyasa actually uses a Brahmana technique. So I told you guys yesterday we were going to talk about Lungana, Brahmana, and Samana, right? So Lungana is that contraction of the universe, and Brahmana is the expansion. So what that means, and I get this question all the time, teachers will ask me, when do I inhale and when do I exhale? Do I inhale, like when in a vinyasa, when do I inhale, when do I exhale? Well, if you understand the principles of Brahmana and Langana, you understand when to inhale and exhale depending on what the intention of your class is. If you're trying to get people like energized and like worked up and like give them energy, right? You're doing a Brahmana class, and Brahmana is inhale on the expansion, exhale on the contraction, right? So let's look at it. So if I'm doing like sun salutations, if I'm just doing sun salutations, bear with me, is inhale, reach up, exhale, fold. Inhale, halfway lift, exhale, fold. Plant the palms, inhale, jump back or float, exhale. Inhale, upward facing, exhale, down dog. Look to the top of the mat on an inhale, exhale, jump forward. Inhale, halfway lift, exhale, fold. So that's Brahmari. Now, or not Brahmari, that's Brahmana. So imagine if we were to do a Langana practice. This is at the end of the day, we want people to go to bed. Okay, what does that look like? Okay, let me see if I can do it. It's hard to do. A Langana, this is a Langana practice. It goes like this. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Plant the palms, exhale. Inhale, float back. Exhale, upward facing dog. Inhale, down dog. Exhale, look forward. Inhale, float to the top of the mat. Exhale, halfway lift. Inhale, fold forward. Exhale, stand up. Inhale, hands through heart center. It is hard to do, okay? But that's a Langana practice. And like, so you can teach that in a class, that's totally fine, but you would want to do it the whole practice. You don't want to go back and forth, Langana, Brahmana. You'll confuse the system a little bit, right? Another good way to do, oh yeah, I'll tell you the benefits in 1 second. So another way to do it is to do it cat-cow. Remember, in a regular vinyasa, we do inhale, cow, exhale, cat. Well, if you want to teach this concept just at the beginning of class, Brahmana and Langana, oftentimes I'll do a Langana cat-cow, which is exhale, cow, inhale, cat. Okay, and I'll tell them, this is going to feel weird, guys. We're doing Langana practice today. So we're going to calm you down. Like this is, Langana is a calming practice. It's a reducing practice. I've even seen people use this in yoga therapy. They'll use Langana for people who are looking to like literally reduce their like anything. You name it. I've seen yoga therapists use it for people working on weight loss. I've seen yoga therapists use it for people who are trying to like quit smoking or quit drinking. I've been, any reduction, anything that you're trying to reduce or take away from, you use Langana. Anything that you're trying to expand or create more of, you use Brahmana. That's the benefit. And to the nervous system, so Brahmana excites you, Langana subdues you. Questions? Okay, so Alana, it's in the text and it's in some of the videos, but Iyengar is Hatha yoga. And guys, Hatha is Hatha, it's not Hatha. I don't tell people that a lot. I don't like to like shake the boat, but if we're looking at the way we say Sanskrit, the H isn't pronounced the same way it's pronounced in English. Does that make sense? So it's like silent, it's a hard T, it's like and I don't even do it right, it's Hatha. It's like in the middle of your mouth. If Shiva was here, she'd talk to you guys about it. And then Ashtanga is Patabi Joyce. And then Vini Yoga is Desika Char. And these three teachers are master teachers who all learned from Krishna Maracharya. And so that's why we say that this is our lineage. This is where it came from. All right. Any questions about Brahmana and Langana? Yes, ma'am.
Hi. Could you use Brahmana at the beginning to sort of get everyone energized at the beginning of class, up to the end, and then maybe did you Londoner? I'm not sure the pronunciation. Was it Londoner to calm everyone back down at the end? Maybe.
Yeah, you could. I mean, I've never done it that way, but I'm sure you could.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Alana, did I answer your question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I know I came from these three lineages, but someone must have brought all three together to create vinyasa.
I don't think they did. I think that people just started doing flow, which is, okay, so here's what I've researched, okay? That people started, so we have Core Power and we have Yoga Works. And Yoga Works was created by Mahdi Azrati. Mahdi Azrati is my great-grand teacher, okay, if I had to like put it like that. So my teacher, Shanti Kelly. Shanti Kelly's teacher is Annie Carpenter. Annie Carpenter's teacher is Mahdi Azrati. And Annie Carpenter and Mahdi Azrati studied with both Iyengar and Pattabhi Jois. So they both studied Hatha Yoga and Ashtanga Yoga, okay? So I think, truth be told, a lot of people think that it's just Hatha and Ashtanga Yoga, but they've forgotten Desikachar. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So like,
Yeah.
who brought Desikachar back in?
Exactly. So that's why I put Desikachar back in, and I haven't seen a book yet that talks about the history of Vinyasa. So it's on my to-do list. I'll get to it hopefully early 2021. But that's the more research I do on yoga is basically, you know, Mahdi created Yoga Works, and Yoga Works then became this big franchise company. We have Yoga Works all over the world, all over the country. I know at least all over the country. I think there's some international branches as well. And then she sold Yoga Works. So somewhere in there, you know, they had Hatha classes, they had, you know, Ashtanga classes, they had like Kundalini, all the things. Somewhere in there, everything changed so that there was more flow-based yoga just in the community. And I think part of that was because when Pattabhi Jois died, his family said nobody can be certified to teach Ashtanga yoga unless they come to Mysore. So you have to go to Mysore to get certified, and then you actually have to sign a thing that says you won't teach anybody else to teach it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it really did like sort of landlock, you know, Ashtanga over in India. It's like, you're over there, and if you really want to study Ashtanga, that's where you go. Like from my understanding, even Kino can't like lead a teacher training in Ashtanga, like because she was trained by Pattabhi, and like there's like this whole lineage, like teacher-student relationship thing. And so I think that to get around that, because Ashtanga is so popular, to get around it, Vinyasa sort of came out of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it just kind of like naturally evolved to fill that void.
Yes, yes. And then it became like, sorry. But then it became more like easy to teach in a corporate setting, right? Like, so Core Power does a brand of vinyasa, right? And it's easy to teach the style and all of those things. So I think that that's why it became so popular, and that's why I brought Core Power into this, is because they were looking for something that was easy to translate, easy to scale.
That makes sense. I mean, taking a ton of vinyasa classes at like gyms, that's how I got started.
Yeah. People love it, and people love it. And so so if we break down the word, well, what does vinyasa mean? Vin is like that heat part, right? It's that heat, that masculine, that solar energy. And yasa is a specific sequence. So the vinyasa that we use is Surya Namaskara A and Surya Namaskara B, and then people teach a variation of that to connect these hatha standing postures. And that's what we've come to know as vinyasa in like America, for example.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for clarifying your question, because I was like, I don't understand.
Can you just spell?
Appreciate-
Sorry.
Yes.
And bromia.
Part. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Can you say it again?
I was just wondering if you could spell Lungara, and is it Brominia?
Lungana and Brahmana, I think it's in the chat someplace. I would not be the person to tell you how to spell it, but let me find it. Yes, somebody spelled it perfectly. Michelle, I can't say your last name, but you got it. I'm going to copy and paste it down here again so that you've got it. It's in the chat. And then samana is also in there. So let's go back to the screen. I think I've spelled it for you guys. Maybe not. Let's see. Nope, I didn't. Okay. So samana is also, and samana is very like sattvic. It's balanced. So it might be something like a restorative class, right? Or it might be something like a very slow flow. And we'll have to ask Anna Pilar if there's a different way to breathe for samana. I'll write myself a note. Again, she's the actual Vini Yoga teacher in this duo. I'm definitely more vinyasa trained. All right, I'll ask about that tomorrow or maybe tonight. Okay, so back in it, transitions and sequencing. We talked about transitions yesterday, and I really encourage you to play with them. When you're first starting to teach yoga, it's extremely helpful to write your sequence or to think out your sequence, and then to practice it to get it in your body before you teach it. So I used to do this. I taught on Sunday night. I taught 2 classes back to back. Sunday afternoon, I would practice, myself at home, and I would sort of work it out there, and then I'd go teach it at the studio. So it works really well. But really, the sequences that you do, make sure they feel good in your body. And then when you teach them, especially if it's like your first time teaching a particular transition, watch your students. Watch them to make sure they get the transition. Does that make sense? And if students do it and it's not, really challenging for them, then you've got a good one, right? But if people are falling out and they're like looking at you like you're a little, like they don't understand where you're going, then that's when you need to reevaluate whatever transition it is. Okay, so we talked about determining our purpose. We talked about theming without projection. We talked about selecting asanas. And I guess, let me go back here. So when we select these asanas, you can see here what I'm talking about. So here we are, and we're in down dog. And so from down dog, I move to, pyramid pose. And then maybe I do a lunge, and I've got like this humble warrior lunge thing going on. And then maybe I do, Anjaneyasana, and then maybe I do lizard, and then maybe I do half splits. But all of these are like neutral, with the exception of lizard, which is a good option here because it's helping us to like undo some of that neutral flexion, because that can be a lot on the hip flexors, right? So external rotation just helps to give us a little bit different sensation here. So, we just want to select asanas that go with each other and that complement one another. But we also want to remember, if we're doing something like I said, heart openers the other day, or if we're doing a whole lot of flexion, don't forget to counter it. Don't forget to take your body in the opposite direction. So if I'm forward fold, forward fold, forward fold, what do I need to do? I need to open my heart. I need to open up through the chest, right? So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about countering our postures. We're talking about moving from a one place that is very sort of, like either in flexion, in extension, and it's spinal as well as it is the hips. So, I teach you guys a lot of sequencing around the pelvis and the shoulders, but don't forget the spine. I don't teach a lot of sequencing around the spine because of, you can be in warrior one, for example, and you can be in flexion if you go into humble warrior, or you can be in extension if you go into cactus arms. Do you see what I'm saying? So the spine isn't a good reference point for me to teach you sequencing, but don't forget about it. It's an important part of practice to move the spine in and out of flexion, extension, axial extension, and axial flexion. So make sure you try to tick all of those boxes. Okay, selecting pranayama, we talked about this. Pranayama comes after asana, so they need to move at least a little bit, even if it's just a few supine twists, maybe a happy baby, maybe they rock and roll and come into tabletop. And then you start getting them to do their cat-cow with some pranayama, that's great. But they need to do a little bit of movement before they get started. So this is actually a difference in philosophy. In the Buddhist tradition, and we've got some Buddhist friends here, I'm sure. In the Buddhist tradition, my understanding is the asana is not as important as the breathing and the meditation. So like in a lot of Buddhist traditions, they'll go straight into like a meditative seat or a contemplative seat, right? Whereas in the Vedantan or the Hindu tradition or the Indian lineage of yoga, the asana is very important before meditation. Like the Indian yogis looked at it as an opportunity to get the body in alignment so that the mind would be in alignment. That whole Ayurveda, the mind and the body have a relationship. And when the mind is in dis-ease, the body's in dis-ease. So if we can get the body in ease, maybe the mind will get into ease. Does that make sense? So it's just a slightly different philosophy, and just be aware that some people are gonna take a more Buddhist philosophy on this. Some people are gonna take a more, Indian, Hindu philosophy on it. I don't love using those terms. I think it's also very geographical too. So, I prefer to say, I don't know what I prefer to say. Let me think about this. Anyway, let's move on. Any questions? Okay. All right. Dynamic movement, we talked about that. So selecting postures that help you to channel prana, warrior one, warrior two, with reverse warrior, etc., will get the most dynamic movement out of it. And then these principles of Brahmana, Langana, Samana, here they're spelled for you again, are important factors that we can look at when using dynamic movement and pranayama. It just helps to provide a little bit of balance. And I do like, I really feel that a yoga teacher is different than, a yoga instructor. I have been a yoga instructor and a yoga teacher, and there are some days that I'm a yoga instructor and some days I'm a yoga teacher, and one's not better than the other. But when you are a yoga instructor, you're going in, you're creating a sequence, you've got a playlist going, and everybody just feeling good, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's all about movement and breath, but there's not a lot of like education in there. And sometimes that's super appropriate, right? Like if I'm gonna do a community class and it's a free community class, I just want them to move and breathe together. I'm not there to like throw philosophy at them, right? They just wanna be in community and feel that connection with other people, and they wanna feel good, right? So that's what I'm gonna give them. But if I'm at the studio and I have a class, and it's people that have been studying with me, where I'm going to teach them. I'm going to teach them while they're in their asana practice, these concepts of Brahmana and Langana and Samana. I'm going to teach them about the Panchamaya. I'm going to teach them about the chakra bodies. I'm going to teach them about, the lines of energy and the way that energy moves through the body. I'm going to teach them to feel energy as a felt sensation in their body. I'm going to teach them to feel the difference in their energy when they practice pranayamas that are more Langana versus pranayamas that are more Brahmana. So these are all the things that I'm going to do as a teacher. Does that make sense? And so sometimes you're just going to be instructing, and that's okay, because nobody needs to be taught all the time. Sometimes we just need to have fun, right? But when we put on that teacher hat, remember there's more layers to it. Okay, what I'm sure you've all been waiting for. We are going to talk about playlist and musical accompaniments. So my teacher's teacher, Annie Carpenter, does not play music at all. I go back and forth. I will play music sometimes, and I will play music, and other times I will not play music. I used to play popular music, like pop culture type music, and now I just laugh because if I tried to play one of those playlists while I was teaching now, I don't think I could get through it, to be honest with you. I don't use popular music now because it distracts me from teaching because I'm so hyper aware of what the lyrics are saying. And I'm constantly thinking about how somebody else might interpret that. So let's talk about it. Let's have a little conversation about music. Like, how do you guys feel about music? Do you like it when people use popular music? Do you not like it when people use popular music? What comes up for you around this?
I personally am like into it. I mean, I'm not into it. That's wrong. I personally love pop music, but I don't like it in a yoga class because of what you said. It's sort of distracting, especially in like Shavasana or something where you're supposed to be like chilling out and zoned. I don't know. I tend to just focus on like lyrics and things and danciness.
Sorry, go ahead.
I personally, one experience I had, somebody put a music that brings me very bad memories and ruined my whole class because I was fighting with somebody, the music was fine, but my memories about the music was very bad. So it really ruined my entire class that day.
Yeah.
I teach a dance fitness class, so if people play pop music, I'm choreographing in my head, so I cannot focus on yoga anymore.
Okay.
For me,
Hello?
hi.
I'm sorry, I think I interrupted someone. Was someone else talking?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I've been told, now this is interesting because I usually have done it when I practice alone, and I've been told that it's not really yoga or a yoga class. I do something I like to call anger management yoga. Sometimes where I'll put on some gangster rap and handle some stuff. And for me, it works very well, and it helps me with purging a lot of feelings. I'm a musician, I love music, so I like to design things around that. And I actually find it to be more empowering and more able to focus on my feelings when I have something like that to push me through a set.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I like that actually. I'm going to talk more about that in a second. Michelle?
Yeah, I guess for me it's kind of the opposite, and maybe it just depends on the person. Because I love to have the music playing in the background. Actually, it helps my overall mood. It helps elevate my mood. It helps the state that I'm in. I still do a lot of body flow, which is Les Mills' program. Not sure if you are familiar with it, but it's great music. It's soulful music. It's neo soul. And for me, it just adds something else there. But, when it's too quiet, it's just not for me. So even if I practice here at my home, I use instrumental, which it helps that background, especially when I get to the part where I'm ready to cool down. So maybe not throughout the entire yoga practice, but I find myself wanting that when it's time for the cool down portion.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. Michelle,
yes.
Where I'm at here in BC, like in the town that I'm in, you will not find a yoga class that everyone plays music. And it goes between kind of soft rock, which I find because I teach as well, I choreograph in my head, but usually it's just instrumental, and I love that, right? So just as a background, but you won't find a class in my town where it's quiet. Everyone plays music.
Yeah.
No, I take a lot of.
Conversely, where I am, we don't, in several studios, we have classes that do not play music at all. The music is our breath, and we link our breath to our movement, and that helps us get into our bodies deeper, I find. And I practice personally by myself with music sometimes, but it can't have any, for whatever reason, it can't have any lyrics. It has to be completely instrumental. And when I teach without music because I want people to tune in to their bodies. And I find that music can take you out of your body, give you something to distract you with.
Yeah. Yeah.
Michelle, like I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm just trying to jump in. Sorry. But I feel like, what I'm learning from these, like how a couple people have said, which I didn't even realize, is that a lot of people, when there's lyrics involved, it brings them back to a memory. And so I think like with me, what I'm realizing through this session or just this conversation is that I think sometimes I try to force like what I like on the students. And so it's like, I feel like the neo soul or like the instrumental will be good and it will make the class great. But I just love what Carolina said just now. It's like and what you kind of said earlier, or what you've been saying, is that we want to focus on the students and not so much on us. And so tapping into that breath and that inner self, I think is like the key. And that's what this is helping me realize. So I feel like even what you said earlier, kind of reading the room and who you're teaching, like community classes may be more fun, but some of those classes where you want people to dive in deeper into themselves, it might be better to just do no music. So this is just really interesting because I think I was only in my head and realizing what I liked and what made me enjoy class, but that might not be the same for everyone. So this is super helpful for me. So thank you.
Sure. Awesome. I'm glad it's helpful. One more comment and then I want to jump in, and we're going to keep talking about this for a while. So just one more comment.
I was going to say, the reason I like Synergy is it's like a yoga flow class, but it has music. And for me, you still have the breath in the beginning. Still have Savasana in the, if I said correctly, in the end for the meditative state. But it just adds it just adds to your senses. In addition to the physical movements, you have, music, you've got sound, and you have other things to help you have a more holistic state of being that, if you're coming from a busy workday, can transition and tune into, a holistic experience where you're sort of relaxing all of your senses, and it can both, I think, be relaxing and empowering and help you transition to a more sort of both peaceful state. So I just enjoy it. And I think, at some point, I think it's important to have universal themes that we discussed yesterday and not to be projecting your personal stories or beliefs. At the same time, anytime you do anything, it's going to be a decision that could be triggering. Someone does a pose that I can't do because of my limits, and everyone has their limits. It may be triggering. And on some level, I know, like just because I have a therapeutic background, also ignoring things isn't helpful. So giving chance to, process it, or for me to, if there's a pose I can't do, it's also an opportunity to sort of honor my body where it's at and accept my body where it's at and learn modification and adaptations that, allow me to still move on and function. And I think music, can have the same experience.
Sure. Yeah, that's a
So
great.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I have a question. So if we're like live streaming, or if we're like recording our videos for future people, is there any like copyright things that we need to keep in mind for when we do it? Because I know it's like a big issue for YouTube, and I think Facebook also has like a rise with like copyright infringement for music.
Yes, it's a big deal, and we will talk about that. Can I ask you guys a question? Do I need to switch something about? Can you guys see me or no?
Yes.
Okay. Not sure how to do something. Anyway. Okay.
I have a question for you, because I teach other formats. So I understand, like, we're trying to make sure that it's a safe space for everybody, but I know that there's also a point where like certain students are drawn to a certain instructor because of their style of class. So I guess, how do we decide what the line is between our preference and like our style and the way that affects our students, I guess, because the class is for them, but it's something that we put together for them. So we're going to be in it, I guess, at some point. So I guess, how do I know where my line is between what I'm doing in the class for them, or if I'm putting too much of myself in the class?
Sure. So first of all, I think that I don't think there's anything wrong with using popular music if it works for you. You know, if it works for you, that's great. I don't mind. To be honest, I don't even have a problem with using like gangster rap in a yoga class if you tell people that's what you're doing. Tell them. Don't, that needs to be in the title. You know, it needs to be vinyasa flow with like gangster rap. And I'm not going to list somebody because that would really show how old and out of touch I am. But, you know, I mean, like, it's definitely something you want to tell people about. And I say the same thing to people who want to teach Christian yoga. Teach Christian yoga all day long, but tell people in the title what it is. You don't want somebody walking in and, you know, thinking they're getting into one class and then they're like having scriptures read to them, or there's like gospel music or something like that. I really, like I said yesterday, I don't believe there is bad yoga out there. I think all yoga is beneficial. And like we heard earlier, you know, some people like to put on like music that is activating almost so that they can work through their stuff in a class. And we actually have a studio in Austin that does a class like that. I forget what it's called. It's not anger management yoga. It's this actually there's a lot of controversy around this particular class because there's like profanity in the class, and you know, yoga teachers say, well, that's not yoga, and blah 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 blah. But you know, I sort of go back to Richard, and I'm like, well, if I'm supposed to welcome every thought, feeling, memory, sensation, you know, there's a few F-bombs in my experience, right? And so like I have to welcome those every once in a while. I have to be okay with them. So, you know, some people really like trapped vinyasa. Like that's a big thing in Houston and Dallas, like a huge thing. It's bigger there than it is here. And people love it. I really don't have a problem with it as long as people know what they're getting into. You know what I'm saying? Like you don't want somebody to get into a class and be like shocked. But if I was teaching a class, you know, I would be teaching a class that is true to my personality, Autumn. So my personality right now is much more projection free than it was 5 years ago. And, you know, I'm going to actually show you in a second my playlist from 5 years ago versus my playlist now, and you'll see the difference. You know, my playlist 5 years ago had a lot more popular music, a lot more emotionally charged music, but it wasn't over the top and it wasn't like aggressive. It was just like, you know, you could have actually thought, oh, maybe this is a breakup like soundtrack she's got, or maybe this is a, you know, like change soundtrack she's got, or maybe this is an uplifting soundtrack she's got, or something like that. There were themes to my music more, and now they're not so much. You know, so I think that the answer to your question, Autumn, and to anybody else who's wondering, I'm not going to tell you there's a right way or a wrong way to put music into your practice, but your music will project something about you. Okay, so if you're doing projection-free, instrumental is the way to go, and or like traditional. But even traditional, I worry about sometimes because there are people that are coming to my class and they're coming for a projection-free experience, and then I've got like, you know, Durga mantra on there, and they're like, hey, I'm Christian and this doesn't work for me. You know what I'm saying? So I have to be really careful if I'm going to put any music out there and teach in a projection-free way. I need to make sure it's not going to be offensive to anyone, and that's hard to do, right? At the end of the day, we're also not mind readers. I used to tell people I'm psychic, but I'm not clairvoyant. So I might have feelings about things and I might pick up on energy, but I can't read your mind, you know? So we do the best we can. Yeah. Any other questions, comments? I see there's a lot of conversation in the chat about this. I knew this was a popular question.
Yeah, what I wanted to add is the cultural implications of that, because we don't know where people are and what they need to kind of lure them in. And if we're meeting people where they are, because I thought that was the broad spectrum of the scholarship program. So if I'm looking from a cultural standpoint, it may take trap vinyasa to get my people there, the people who look like me, and then introduce them to something else later on down the road. So that's my whole thing to it. We don't know what it may take to get the cultural component of people that look like me to come forward. So it may be Afro, some type of Afro type vinyasa to get someone there. But once they are there, then you can introduce them to different things that they may like or enjoy. So
yeah,
go ahead, darling.
Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, yes, yeah. So I totally understand what she was saying about, you know, you're not luring people in, but just something to get, you know, people started, you know, for the Black community, you don't really see a lot of women practicing a lot of yoga. So something to get them in, like R&B music or soulful music, something that, you know, people will like, and then, you know, try to get them to, I don't know, like change direction of something.
You know, even I don't know that we need to change direction. You know what
Yeah,
I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
it works, it works. You know, like
Okay,
why break it if it's, or why fix it if it's not broken, right?
Yeah.
I agree with you guys 100%. In fact, you know what I think they need to do for kids? In Austin, kids have to do yoga as part of PE, but they put a mat on the ground and they say, hold warrior 2 for 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, put it to pop music. Give them some Justin Bieber and put them in vinyasa, and we would change the world, guys. Like, we just need to meet them where they're at and give them fun, and then later that other stuff comes. So I'm with you guys 100%. 100%.
I think like a lot of people are saying basically it needs to be approachable, or like there's an approachability aspect if like I recognize the music and it kind of makes it fun for me, and then I'm engaged and I'm interested. Whereas like honestly, when I first got into yoga, if I had walked into a class and it was like silent and philosophy driven and like I would have been, or like they were using all the Sanskrit terms, I would have not come back. And so like the place I went to when I first got into yoga used music. It was very like fun as like a studio, and that got me in, and then I learned more. But I would never have gone to that like really intense class originally.
Sure.
So
And
I just,
that's why
Michelle, both of the Michelles, Michelle Young, Michelle Evans, I appreciate this because I always felt like I didn't fit into yoga because I don't know. For me, music is a big part of my life. So the fact that Michelle says like, I'm going to have a class that maybe has trap music and that may fit my community, that makes me feel better because I feel like I have to change a lot of the things, which is why I have so many questions. I feel like I have to change a lot of the things that make me comfortable to fit into yoga. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I actually, can I speak to that for just a moment before you go, Carm? So I really want you guys to meet yourselves where you're at first, okay? You don't have to change anything, Autumn. You are perfect just the way you are. You are a divine being in the human experience, and you don't need to do anything, you know? That's my philosophy on it. So don't think that you guys need to change yourself, because really and truly, for every single being on the planet is just a face of God, you know, and God is perfect just the way it is. Like you don't have to do anything. So, you know, I want to encourage you to meet yourself where you're at. There's a lot of imposter syndrome that comes along with yoga teacher training. People think, oh, well, I don't look like this, or I don't look like that. And that's part of why we're doing what we're doing. Not only with the scholarship program, guys, but that's the reason I make this so affordable and so accessible, because not every yoga teacher should look the same. This is not how our world works, you know, like we need people out there of every different size, shape, color, nationality, like, you know, language. It needs to be in multiple different formats with multiple different types of music. In order for it to have the reach that it can have and to impact the world in a way that we want it to. And nobody has to, you know, yoga isn't a religion. It's a philosophy. There's a philosophy to it. So, you know, and all of the philosophical elements are things that you guys were already doing. You know, you don't steal, you don't lie. Nobody would be here if those were their tenets, right? If those were their foundational values, this wouldn't speak to you guys, you know, but because you are good people, you are generous, you are kind, you are compassionate with others, that's what's brought you to this place. And so those foundational tenets are already part of you. Who cares what music you use? You know, this conversation is more about normalizing the use of music and the way we use music. The way I use it, the way I'm comfortable with using it is different now than it was when I started. And that may happen to you guys as well, but there's no one right way. The only thing, and I'll say it probably multiple times, the only thing that I really want you to do is communicate to your community what they can expect in your class. That way they can make the choice as to whether or not it's something that they're comfortable with. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's
take a question. I'm sorry. I have a question before you. I had to step away quickly, but this was part of the conversation that I really wanted to hear. But my question is, and you may have mentioned this already, when it comes to music, I've never done yoga in a yoga class. So taking this is very new to me. And I am very much into fitness and I have a workout, but I don't listen to music, right? Because for me, music is distracting. And so I think I like what you just said, is to let those that come to know what, I guess, your class expectation is, what the expectation is. So do we have to have music? I know that's a part of yoga. Like I said, I've never been in a class before, but do we have to have it is my question.
No, you don't. And in fact, you know, it might be good for us to, you know, take a few minutes just to watch how Annie Carpenter teaches. Would that be beneficial for you guys? You want to see somebody teach without music for like 5 minutes? Yes, no?
I think there's a lot of yeses. So.
All right.
But, and then one other question before you go. So is it a good idea, or this is just a suggestion? Could you not ask those, especially those that probably come to your class a lot, like what type of music do they like? And then you can create a playlist from that, right? So then everyone would at least get to hear something that they would be able to connect with.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I recommend that. If you have like actual regulars and they're coming often to your classes, then I would recommend, I would highly recommend that you go ahead and ask them and have a conversation with them. Yeah, have a conversation with them for sure.
Thank you.
There's a teacher I used to really like to go to her stuff, and she would always do like this thing where you would check in and she'd be like, any request? And I would always ask for Lou Reed. Like, that's what I wanted to practice to. So, you know, I definitely think asking it's a very compassionate thing to do. Very compassionate, for sure. For sure. Now, of course, I'm trying to find a video of her teaching, and it's not, I'm seeing a lot of her, like, a lot of her philosophy, or a lot of her, like, specific on a specific, like, topic, but I'm not seeing a lot of her flows. For those of you who have like Glow Yoga, she's on there, and she never uses music. And I could go to her class, and I think I could be engaged, and you know, it wouldn't be a bad experience. But I do like music. I think music is really fun, and I enjoy it. So let's take a look at playlists, and let's take a look at Spotify. I use Spotify for my playlist, but you can obviously use anything. We do use Sonos here. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Sonos, but basically Sonos allows you to play music from Spotify in multiple different rooms, and you can have multiple different musics playing, and so it works for us for a studio setting. So this is some of my stuff, and we'll just go into my actual playlist, and that they're all right here. So I guess some of these are mine, some of these aren't. So we'd have to go like down to the bottom to see like what I used to use. So this would be something. This is Yes, this is something I used to use, okay? So I don't know how old this is. This is probably at least 4 years old. So you can see there's a lot of popular songs in here. There's a lot of songs that we would hear like on the radio. And people really liked, this type of playlist. They thought it was, people used to tell me actually after my class, oh my God, that was the best playlist ever. And now this is what my it's all like either mantras, chants. Sometimes I'll do, let's see, there's one that's more like now. Let's see. Now, here we go. So now this would be, this is, if I was going to do something edgy, it might be like this, which is all instrumental. So this is all instrumental music. It's sort of like, here. I don't even know if it'll let me play at the same time. Let's see if it's not too loud.
You might have to share computer sound. Yeah. Well, you have to close out of share screen and go back in.
Computer sound. If it'll let, I don't even know if it'll let me do it. Let me try. Share computer audio settings, maybe.
Michelle, while you're doing that, what was the name of your teacher that's Glow?
Oh, Annie Carpenter.
Oh,
Annie Carpenter.
I know that.
Yeah, so that's a good example if you want to look at somebody, if you want to look at somebody else who teaches without music, she's a good example. So this is basically just like sort of like electric, sort of like tribal. It's almost tribal a little bit. Like I can't get it to share, but let me see if I can share it in the chat. Yeah.
If your playlist is public, we can just Google it later, like look it up later on Spotify.
Yeah, I'll just share it for you guys. And it is public. They should all be public. But I also do a lot of like, just basically traditional. So this is traditional. This is what I would say traditional flow. So you can see there is a lot of like, not kirtan music, but like more yoga-y type music, right? But like I said, there's nothing wrong with the stuff that, I used to play. There's nothing wrong with the stuff that, is more popular. It's just not, it doesn't speak to me the same way. And it's hard, it distracts me. So, yeah. Questions or comments before we talk about how to do it?
Yes, I'd like to comment, please.
Yes, please.
Hi. For me, I'm a little older than most people, I think, in your classes. I had 2 sons, very young, and I don't know how many people have children, but 2 young boys can be very noisy. And I'm sorry, I have my video off. And I learned to crave silence. For me, yoga is a meditation in itself, and I love the silence. But when it comes to the savasana, then I like music kind of like what I listen to when I go for a massage. That just kind of soothing instrumental music. And I haven't taught. I'm way, way young in yoga, so this is all good stuff to listen to because everyone is different, and some people do like the music and some don't. But that's a personal preference of mine, is that I want the silence. I even now, my kids are all grown and gone, and I love silence.
Yeah.
That's it. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that like if I was going to do a silent class, I would tell people what I'm doing. I would, in the description, I would say this class is silent, because some people really want it and some people don't. And the people who don't really don't want it. A lot of times silence can be extremely difficult for people. So do remember that silence can be as activating for people as a lot of music. Other comments, questions?
Whenever you play the chants and mantras, do you ever kind of sync that up to what you're doing like in a particular part of your session?
Yes.
Or do you
So,
find that that's like way too complicated?
and that's actually what we're going to talk about next. I'm trying to find, I wish, I'll find it at some point. I'll find it before the break. But for those of you who are interested.
What about like nature sounds, like running water, the brook, the stream, birds?
Especially for like yen, especially for yen. Yes, yes. But for Vanessa too, for sure. There is an instruction sheet I have on how to put music into Zoom for you guys, and I will add that before the end of lecture, before we go to lunch today, okay? So it's instruction on how to marry Zoom and Spotify so that people can hear the music and still hear you, okay? Next question, thought, before I move into how you do it.
Michelle, sorry.
No, you go for it.
Oh, I was just going to say real quick, yeah, I don't think I've ever been to an Iyengar class that has music.
Yeah.
Typically not. And I mean, I know there's not typically a flow in Iyengar, and so that's possibly why.
Yeah.
But generally in Iyengar, they don't.
Yeah, 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 that's a good point, a good distinction to make. Thank you. Rain.
So, I have not actually practiced at too many studios here in the US. Obviously, I spoke yesterday, I'm from South Africa. When I first started practicing yoga, the next person to me in age was 50 years older than me. It was a lovely, like, older group of ladies that we all practiced Iyengar, which was really divine. But any studio that I've been to has always been completely silent, until going to one or two here in North America. I lived in Canada before the US, and there was also music there. So is the expectation normally to have music? Because obviously, from a cultural perspective, my anticipation is for it to be silent. But if you're going and you're teaching in a studio where the expectation is actually to play music, it's something that I've kind of got to get my head around.
Yeah, I think that if you're teaching the vinyasa flow, there is an expectation in the States that there is music. Wouldn't you guys say not if you think that's true? If you're going to a vinyasa flow in the States, there's an expectation that there's music. Yes? Yes, I think so. Which is why I actually have a note for myself to have Tara add to all of the descriptions, you know, music. So we have a teacher meeting this afternoon, and we need to put in the descriptions, you know, typical playlist include popular music, or typical playlist include, you know, instrumental music. Like, I think that's important to put into a description, actually. Because then you set the expectation. When I used to work for Black Swan was more like a gym meets yoga studio, and like big box. Like you could fit 100 people in that room. And most of my Saturday classes were like 60 to 70 deep. And they expected music. They expected loud, sometimes obnoxious music.
Yes, you are.
So I think that I did have a few students that would come into those classes and leave and be like, write us a review, like, oh my God, it was horrible. The music was so loud, blah, 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 blah. But every other student, that's what they expected. You know what I'm saying? So again, I think this is where it's important to communicate. Thank you for that. Any other questions?
I was just going to add about the bit with having kids and including music in your practice. Like for me, sometimes it just changes, you know, like I have 3 boys, and sometimes on days where I'm like really overstimulated, you know, I want like more of a silent practice. And then there are days where I'm feeling really energetic and I want music with my practice. And I think a lot of that just goes into like knowing why you do or you don't want music, and understanding that stimulation and anxiety and those kinds of things can be triggered too. But yeah, for me, I guess when I kind of like take an overview of the class and look at the people that I have, or the people that have been showing up on my online classes, and then just kind of taking into account like what their needs and what their life are and why they come to the mat, before I, you know, put my playlist into it or put music to it.
Sure. Yeah, and I do think it depends on the day, right? It depends on the day, how you're feeling. I share that 3-kid thing, you know, it's like sometimes you just are already overstimulated and don't need any more stimulation, you know, so definitely a real thing for sure.
Hey, Michelle, this
Sorry.
is Ashika. I grew up in India and with yoga. So for me, when I started going to yoga studio in New York, so I started with the vinyasa. And then one day, because they always turn on the music. So for me, yoga is silence. Yoga is you are communicating with your inner self. And I'm doing pranayama for 10 years, 10, 15 years. So once I attended Ashtanga, the reason I got more into Ashtanga, I'm sorry, I know we're talking about vinyasa, because there is no music. So I think real yoga, the roots, finally the journey is from noise to silence. So I think the silence is very important. I mean, this is my 2 cents.
Sure. I mean, I guess
sorry.
1 second, guys. I want to address that. So, you know, I wish that we could ask Desikachar what he would think, you know, because Desikachar and Krishnamacharya's philosophy was, if it doesn't work, we've got another way, right? So for people, I mean, there are people, and we have to acknowledge this, and some of us are those people who cannot be in silence because the noise in our head, or, you know, is too much, right? Can anybody acknowledge that yes, that sometimes the silence can provoke, you know, in people anxiety, because then they're left to deal with what's in their head. And I agree with you that we are moving from this external world. Yoga is moving from the external to the internal. Yoga is realizing and recognizing that you are a divine being in a human experience, and that once you fully realize that in that enlightened state of being, in that turiya, then you can go out and practice, you know, seeing divinity in every other person. And you know, because you're from this lineage and this culture, that doing that over and over and over and over and over again establishes a person in realized divinity, like they are realized because they see everybody as divinity, right? And so, but some people can't do that right away. And so again, you know, I always fall back to Desikachar, and Desikachar would say, you know, if one pranayama doesn't work and it causes anxiety, well, good news, we've got another one we'll try, you know? And this is sort of the way I'm going to approach the music as well. You know, what doesn't work for some people is going to work for other people. And I teach from a non-dual lens. And so I don't see bad, I don't see good. I see a spectrum of opportunity that will all lead us to the same place. Like Patanjali says, there are many different ways to Ishvara Pranadama. There are many different ways to Samadhi. And for some people, it is faith. And for some people, it is Ishvara Pranadama. And for some people, it is working with the teacher. And for some people, it's Rajas Yoga. So it all is dependent or interdependent on the person and how they are receiving it. But yes, I think moving towards the silence is where we end up going as we move into our practice, to whatever degree. Tanya.
Sorry, I forgot to lower my hand. I had asked about the nature sounds, but you answered it. Sorry about that.
Can I make a comment very quick?
Yes.
I think like everything else, like if you are in a class and an airplane passes by, you can ignore if it's not for you. I mean, you are trying to go inwardly. And the music the same. If like the music is not louder than the practice, like is the music not defining the whole beat of the class, you can just ignore and do your thing. But I think that's the kind of volume, not literally the volume, but the music can be the whole practice. the music can be louder than the practice. If it's just a background and you are doing, you can just ignore it, I mean, as a practitioner. So I just think we have to be aware, like, you know, unless you really put on your description that this is the kind of class, the music can be the whole, define the whole class. That makes sense. I don't know if my English barrier maybe let me communicate properly.
I definitely hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. I'd like to, you know, again, this isn't a debate on whether or not to use music. This is we're learning how to use music, okay? So we've recognized through this conversation that music can bring up things for individuals, and we've recognized that it can be a form of projection. So when we are teaching in a projection-free way, we need to be careful about the music we select. If we are teaching with projection, which again is not bad or wrong, guys, it's just not the way that I teach you guys to teach. If you are teaching and you are using projection, like Autumn said, you know, maybe her personality is why people are coming to her classes. And her personality is beautiful. I would come to your classes for your personality as well. So, you know, I mean, like, if I'm coming to your classes for your personality, I want a little bit of that projection. Does that make sense? It all depends on what we're doing, what we're coming from. When I went to my teacher's classes, I wanted her personality. That's what I wanted. You know, that's what I wanted that. That's where I was in my practice at that point in my life, right? You know, otherwise I could have easily, you know, sequenced something in my living room and done my own practice at home, right? So we have to understand that I do teach you guys this projection-free method, but I don't want you guys to think that projection, especially benign projection or positive projection, is bad or wrong. It just, it's a different approach to teaching. And if you have that approach, there's room for it. And like Autumn said earlier, the people who are attracted to you and attracted to the way you teach will come to you and will come to your classes, regardless of whether you're doing, you know, projection-free teaching or teaching with projection in your classes. We have some people with their hands up, so I'm going to encourage people to raise their hand so I can call on you. So Cassidy, you're next.
I actually had a question about pranayama, but I can ask you later.
Oh, that's okay. You can ask now.
So my husband and I came to Bikram yoga first. Do you have any experience with Bikram?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So you were talking about pranayama after asana. And so, you know, we were kind of raised up in Bikram. And so I was wondering, they start and end with breath. And so I'm wondering if that's misguided or incorrect, or I was wondering if you could just speak to that.
Well, so I'm going to speak to it from Nashala's perspective, okay? Because Nashala influences so much of my teaching. And like I said, Nashala's, I think she's in her late 70s, early 80s right now. And she says that Patanjali's sutras are written in order on purpose, and that we should be practicing asana first before pranayama. Okay, so that's Nashala's interpretation. But what do we know about what's true? The only thing that's true is you're a divine being in a human experience, and everything else is people's perception of the world, right? And their perception of what they've read or what they've studied. So I agree with Nashala in that if I'm looking at the 8-limbed path of yoga, it makes sense to me that I'm going to start with asana, I'm going to move to pranayama, then I'm going to move to pratyahara, and then that's going to drop me into this concentrative state, which will yield meditation, which will yield samadhi. All makes sense to me. Bikram had a different philosophy, I think. And I haven't studied like significantly in a Bikram studio. I used to practice Bikram quite regularly. And so I'm familiar with the breath before and the breath after and the bellows breath, right? It's the bellows breath, right? The stuff, yeah. And I think that, you know, the people that I know who have studied with Bikram, he was sort of a hard ass. And like, you know, he probably expected that people had done their morning practices and their kriyas and their danyacharya and stuff like that. And in that case, you know, I could see starting it that way. You know, what we have to understand too is, you know, again, I should be careful how I word this, but people who have been practicing yoga traditionally for years and years and years, they wake up and they do Danyacharya. And Danyacharya has Kriya involved. And Kriyas include everything from scraping your tongue to brushing your teeth to using the restroom to washing your body, like all of these things. You come clean to your practice, basically. And so I imagine that a lot of Americans, and this is an assumption I'm making, but I imagine a lot of Americans don't think about taking a shower before they get on their mat. Does that make sense? And I always shower before I practice. So, so I guess what I'm saying is, if you are doing yoga in the traditional sense, like where you're doing your Danyacharya in the morning, you're doing your meditation, you're doing like some gentle practices to move the energy, you're cleaning out the nadis, all the things. And then I start going about my day and I show up at a yoga studio. The idea is I've already done those morning practices that have helped me to prepare for this yoga studio experience I'm gonna have. So that might have been where he was thinking, or what he was thinking. Yeah. Thanks, Cassidy.